The 1996 trial of James Dellinger and Gary Sutton for the murder of Tommy Griffin stands as a chilling study in how a single night of violence in the Tennessee mountains can unravel multiple lives across county lines. It wasn't just about one body found by the Little River. It was a tangled web involving a second murder in a neighboring county, a burned-out car, and a jury selection process so intense that lawyers had to pull individual prospective jurors aside just to see if they could handle the weight of the evidence. When you look at the transcripts from Blount County, like the ones from August 12, 1996, you see this raw moment where the legal system tries to filter out community gossip from actual impartial judgment. A juror from Walland admits they lived just 3 miles from where the body was found, and they remember hearing about a family disagreement. That's the atmosphere we're stepping into, a small community where everyone heard the gunshots, and the court had to decide who was fit to determine if 2 men should live or die.
The geography here is crucial to understanding why this was such a complex legal mountain to climb. You have 2 defendants, Dellinger and Sutton, who were actually uncle and nephew. The crimes happened in February 1992, but by the time they got to the trial Isabella mentioned in 1996, they'd already been convicted for a different murder in Sevier County. That first case involved Connie Branham, who was the sister of the victim in the Blount County case, Tommy Griffin. The prosecution's theory was that they killed Tommy first, and then killed his sister Connie because she was getting too close to the truth. So, by the time Judge D. Kelly Thomas Jr. is sitting in that Blount County courtroom for the Tommy Griffin trial, the defendants are already serving life sentences. The state is now pushing for the death penalty, and that completely changes the stakes of the jury selection, or voir dire.
That's why the individual voir dire we see in the transcript is so fascinating. Usually you see lawyers questioning a whole group of jurors at once, but in capital cases, they often separate them. They need to know if a person's prior knowledge of the case or their moral stance on the death penalty is going to bias them. In this specific transcript, the juror mentions living in Walland, which is right near the Blue Hole on the Little River, where Tommy Griffin's body was discovered. When the judge asks what they remember, the juror brings up a family disagreement. It sounds so domestic, almost mundane, until you realize the disagreement ended with a shotgun blast to the back of the neck. How does a court even begin to find 12 people in a tight-knit area like Maryville or Townsend who haven't already formed an opinion based on that kind of local lore?
It's nearly impossible, which is why the questioning is so surgical. The state, represented by District Attorney Mike Flynn, had to be incredibly careful. If a juror knew about the previous conviction in Sevier County for Connie Branham's murder, they might be predisposed to find them guilty of Tommy's murder too. The law is very strict about not letting prior bad acts poison a new trial unless they meet very specific criteria. Yet, in a town where the local papers like the Daily Times and the Mountain Press had been covering the discovery of a body in a burned car and a man missing after being bailed out of jail, the news is already out there. The juror in the transcript even mentions reading about the girl in the paper. They're referring to Connie. So the judge has to probe, can you set that aside? Can you look only at the evidence for Tommy's death?
Let's break down that evidence, because it's not like there was a smoking gun found in their hands. It was a massive circumstantial puzzle. We know from court records that on February 21st, 1992, Dellinger, Sutton, and Tommy Griffin were all drinking at Howie's Hideaway Lounge in Maryville. They're playing pool. Everything seems fine. Then they leave in Sutton's blue Camaro. Later that night, Tommy gets arrested for public intoxication. He's found shirtless and shoeless on the side of the road. Dellinger and Sutton actually go to the jail and bail him out at 11:25 p.m. That is the last time anyone other than the defendants sees Tommy Griffin alive. Within 30 minutes of that release, witnesses near the Little River hear 2 gunshots. It's such a tight timeline.
And the forensic details that come out later are what really pin them down. Investigators found 12-gauge shotgun shells near Tommy's body at the Blue Hole. When they searched Dellinger's trailer, they found shells that matched those found at the scene. They also found a .303 rifle that was linked to the shell found in Connie Branham's burned-out car in Sevier County. It's this bridge of ballistics between the 2 crime scenes. The defense tried to argue that the search warrant for the trailer was based on false information, and they even challenged the ballistics expert's reliability years later. But at the time of this 1996 trial, the state was presenting this as a seamless narrative of 2 men bailing a friend out of jail just to execute him in the woods.
There's a specific kind of coldness to that, bailing someone out of the safety of a jail cell to kill them. The defense, led by Charles Dease for Dellinger and F.D. Gibson for Sutton, had a monumental task. They weren't just fighting the facts of the night, they were fighting the aggravating circumstances that Tennessee law requires for a death sentence. To get a jury to move from guilty to death, the prosecution has to prove specific factors like the murder being especially heinous or the defendants having a prior violent felony conviction. Since they already had the Sevier County conviction for Connie's murder, the state used that as a primary hammer. It's a legal loop. The second trial is influenced by the first, even though they tried to keep the juries separate.
Right, and that leads to one of the biggest points of contention in the appeals. The defense actually asked for separate juries for the guilt phase and the sentencing phase. They argued that a jury qualified for a death penalty case, meaning they are willing to consider execution, is inherently more likely to convict. They also wanted separate trials for Dellinger and Sutton, arguing that evidence against one shouldn't bleed into the other, but the court denied those requests. Judge Thomas, who we see in the transcript, presided over this, and the Tennessee Supreme Court later upheld his decisions, saying that as long as the evidence would be admissible against both in separate trials, joinder is fine. It saves the state time and money, but the defense argues it sacrifices the individual's right to a fair shake.
It's also worth noting the human element that gets lost in these dry transcripts. When the juror mentions the body in the car, they're talking about a woman, Connie, who was a mother. Her daughter, Sandy, has spoken out in recent years about how this case has frozen her family in 1992. She believes the right men were caught. On the other side, you have the Justice for Gary Wayne Sutton group today, arguing that the evidence was flimsy and that Dellinger, the older uncle, was the real driver of the violence. Dellinger actually died of natural causes on death row in January 2023 at age 71, never having been executed. Sutton is still there, still fighting, with his execution date being pushed back multiple times due to the state's issues with lethal injection protocols.
The protocol issues are a whole other layer of the legacy here. Governor Bill Lee issued a reprieve for Sutton in 2022 because the state wasn't following its own rules for testing the chemicals. It highlights this paradox. The legal system spends decades being incredibly precise about jury selection, questioning one person at a time about a family disagreement in Walland, and then the actual execution of the sentence becomes this messy, bureaucratic hurdle. Even the jury in 1996 had questions. They actually asked the judge during deliberations how much time the defendants would really serve if they were given life instead of death. The judge refused to answer, which became another major point on appeal. Justice Adolfo Birch later dissented on this, saying the jury might have chosen death just because they were afraid life didn't actually mean life.
It's that fear of the unknown that often drives these outcomes. If the jury isn't sure the defendants will stay behind bars, they take the permanent option. It's a heavy burden for a person like the juror in our transcript. You can hear the hesitation in their answers. They remember the news, they remember the body, they remember the proximity of the crime to their own home. It's not just a trial to them, it's a violation of their neighborhood. When the judge asks, "Do you remember anything about the body in a car?" and the juror says, "The girl, just reading it in the paper," you're seeing the moment where a private citizen realizes they are about to become a part of a very dark history.
And that history was built on a very specific kind of East Tennessee setting. The Blue Hole isn't just a name on a map, it's a specific spot on the Little River known to locals. The fact that gunshots were heard there at 11:55 p.m., exactly 30 minutes after they left the jail, is the kind of detail that sticks. The state's case was essentially a clock. 11:25 p.m. release, 11:55 p.m. shots, 9:02 p.m. the next night, Dellinger's truck is seen at Tommy's trailer, and then the trailer goes up in flames. It was a scorched earth policy. They didn't just kill the man, they burned his home. Then they killed his sister and burned her car. The scale of the destruction is what made it so hard for a jury to show any leniency, regardless of whether there was a clear motive or not.
That lack of motive is the one thing that still haunts the case. Even the Supreme Court mentioned that no clear motive was established. Friends drinking beer, playing pool, and then a double homicide and two arsons. Some speculated it was a long-running family feud. Others thought it was about preventing testimony, but we may never truly know the why. We only have the how, documented in thousands of pages of transcripts, like the one from that Monday morning in August 1996. It serves as a reminder that the law doesn't necessarily require a reason for a crime, only proof that it happened and who did it.
Exactly. And as we see Sutton's case continue to move through the system 30 years later, with new investigators looking at those 1996 ballistics and questioning the reliability of the original witnesses, the work done in that courtroom stays relevant. Every question the judge asked, the juror was a brick in a wall that either protects the innocent or seals the fate of the guilty. The detail about individual voir dire shows just how much we value the idea of an untainted mind, even when a crime has left a permanent scar on a small town's memory.
It's a process designed to find a sliver of objectivity in a sea of community trauma. Whether it succeeded is something people in Blount and Sevier counties still debate today. The trial of Dellinger and Sutton wasn't just a local news story, it was a defining moment for Tennessee's capital justice system, testing the limits of circumstantial evidence and the endurance of the appeals process. If you found this look into the mechanics of a high-stakes murder trial compelling, share this episode with someone who follows true crime or legal history.